Hey sellers, welcome back to another tutorial. This is going to be my second one, and it's going to be on the Chapter E rules, Section 9, Paradrops. So don't be intimidated just because it's something new. You have to get into Chapter E eventually. So for you guys that have never tried Paradrops, hopefully this video will be of some use, and hopefully I don't make any egregious mistakes that cannot be recovered from. If you do see something that I do wrong, by all means point out in the comments, and I'll make an addendum probably, or just pull the video down and re-release it with the corrections in place. All right, so without further ado, let's get into it. Now for this Paradrop tutorial, what I'm going to be using is ASL Scenario 36 Rachi Ridge as my example. In particular because it's got some Fallschirmjäger dropping in, 13 squads worth, 4 leaders, and 6 support weapons. So it's got a good mix of everything. And it's an unobstructed landing, which means there's no enemy forces that start on board. In this scenario, the British don't enter the board until turn 3, so that basically gives the Fallschirmjäger the first 3 movement phases to get their shit together. So let's drop the camera and we'll get into the process. All right, first thing we got to figure out is when can actually paradrops happen. Now, they can only happen in several instances, and the weather must be clear. You could have mud, you can have mist, you can be gusty, or you can have snow but not falling snow. You must have one of those conditions in order to have paradrops. Wind direction is established even if there's no wind, which means that most scenarios that involve paradrops will probably outline the wind direction and strength, and if you're going to design your own, you must determine this yourself. So even if there's no wind, there's still a wind direction because it's going to affect drift. Things to remember about paradrops is your paratroopers are going to be helpless while under canopy. You're effectively just swinging on the end of your risers, and until such point you get to the ground, find your weapon cache, or in some cases, maybe you're armed already, then you can start to defend yourself, but in the interim, you're essentially helpless, just hanging there. As a result, you forfeit all your normal capabilities in that player turn, with the exception of close combat. So if you were, for example, to end up landing, when we get to the landing part, on an enemy counter, and you endure any defensive fire that he throws your way, you will be engaged in close combat at the end of that turn. But that's the only exception to being able to do something as a paratrooper. So therefore, you may not fire, you may not move, you may not advance, you cannot direct or assist other units until everybody's chutes are removed. If you're stacked with a leader, doesn't matter, you cannot use the leader's modifier in any which way to mitigate your die rolls that you're going to have to take. Every unit stays off board in the cloaking display box until such point in the advance phase when the chutes come off. Only then are the contents revealed, so a defender will never know what they're necessarily shooting at. All they're going to see is a chute, and the consequences of their fire won't really be affected until the chutes come off in the advance phase. All right, how do we sort out our forces? So again, in using Rachi Ridge as an example, we have 13 squads, 4 leaders, and 6 support weapons, and this is how I've broken them up. Now, each cloaking box, each parachute, is a stick. You need 5 sticks in a wing, and only one wing can be less than 5 sticks. So you can't split them up willy-nilly. You have to have as many full wings as possible, and it's only the last one that will be. Each stick can be a maximum of 1 squad and 1 single-man counter that is stacked with it. Support weapons, and these are, we'll get into the exceptions to this, but typically support weapons are dropped in separate canisters, and you only land with your inherent firepower. There's also a special rule for pre-1942 German airdrops, where they were minimally armed when they descended, and they actually basically have to scrounge around to find weapon canisters to become a full 508. In the interim, you're basically reduced to the status of a 228 to represent the fact you had a couple machine pistols and pistols. So you had some basic armament, but you're only fighting as a full squad as a 228 until such time as you find a canister, which again we're going to get to later on in the rules. Regarding support weapons, if possible, they must be dismantled. So any mediums and heavies, if they have that capability, they must be dismantled. Same with mortars and such. Now, once your support weapon parachutes actually land on the ground, they get flipped over and they remain unidentified until such point as you recover them in the normal way. So you have to spend a movement point in the movement phase, roll a die, and anything but a 6 will pick it up, and or a rally phase with the same die roll. You can pick it up then. Once you recover it, you can then reveal its contents and do what you have to do with it. So the parachute basically serves only to mask the identity and provide a common morale level for its occupants. It does not constitute concealment and does not constitute cloaking. It's just a device used so that everything has a 7 morale, which could be impacted depending on the wind, and the contents therein are not known to the defender until such point as the parachutes come off. Obviously, in the course of play, when you start breaking and winning him as defensive fire comes in, he's going to know that something got affected, but what exactly he should not know until the chute comes off. And a reminder that leaders stacked with squads do not get to use their leadership capabilities for any purposes until they appear again in the advanced phase. And again, that's only going to really impact close combat when you can act normally. So you're not going to be able to use, for example, the 9-2s leadership morale modifier if you have to take a task check, for example. All right, so looking at drop points, these are all established before snare is set up. So before the defender has a chance to do anything, you're looking at the board, you're picking out what the likely drop zone that you have or want your troops to land in. You must also pick a direction that they're going to be coming in from, and all the drop points must share the same direction. Obviously, you have a flight of aircraft coming in, and they're all traveling in the same direction. Each drop point must be at least 5 hexes away from any other pre-designated drop point. And but that's the only caveat. You can pick anywhere on the map boards. Things to consider when plotting a drop point is there's a 50% chance of you landing on your designated drop point. Then you're going to be doing a random location die roll to see where your chutes land, which means you're not going to be on that line. And then lastly, you're going to be adding wind drift to the chutes as well. So you want to consider things like direction of the wind. In this particular case, the wind is blown to the bottom of the screen. So I want my troops to blow away from the hills, away from the buildings, and to land hopefully in this plain area. This house might be an issue if they hit that. Same with this house here, for every reason to land on target. But you can't eliminate every possibility, but you want to as much as possible. So this sequence that happens with draw points, as I mentioned, you secretly pre-designate a draw point before anything is set up on the board, and then it's on the rally phase of your entry turn is when you actually make your die rolls to see where your drop zone ends up. So as I said, there's a 50% chance of you actually landing on your pre-designated draw point, which if you look at the historical precedent, that's probably giving it really generous. Most airborne operations I've read about have inevitably had troops dropping off target, and 50% chance seems like a high percentage, especially if you start talking nighttime drops, unfamiliar territory, that kind of thing. But regardless, the rules say you have a 50% chance of hitting your designated drop point. If you roll a 4+, that means your drop point is not where you want it to be. So how do we determine that? Let's look at what happens with a designated drop point. So this one here, we're going to say is lands off target. And so we want to find out where it is. Now, how you figure this out is by random selection, you determine the map board. So if you have 6 map boards, you roll 6 dice. Highest dice wins. You re-roll any ties until you determine a winner. That board is going to be hosting the drop zone at some point on that board. Once you've determined that board, so for us, we're going to use a colored die will be board 25, and the white die will be board 18. So it's going to be on board 18. Now, it's going to be originally located somewhere in row 5. All right, so you're going to be located somewhere on row 5. Now we have to figure out the hex coordinate. Now the way to do this is the rules say to use the snowdrift procedure, which is Chapter E 3.75. And essentially the way that works is you have all the snowdrift counters in a cup, in a bowl, in a pot, what have you, a bag maybe, and you randomly draw one. Each snowdrift counter has a letter on it, anywhere from A to GG, and that becomes the draw point along hex coordinate 5, where your DZ is going to be. If you use Vassal, we have a handy extension here. In this case, it's the AGG. There we go. So in this particular case, this drop zone is going to land on B5. Now, this is the original start. Again, you use the same direction. The pilot is maybe a little bit drunk, hungover, what have you. Use the same direction. Now you have to determine where it actually lands. The way that's done, according to the drift placement procedure, is you roll a random direction die roll, much like a sniper. So we're going to use black for direction, 2 for 6. So we're going to use a sniper counter as a measure, so it's going to come 6 this way. So it's actually going to land 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is now the new drop zone for DZ1. And you repeat the procedure with all the other ones. So this one here, he's going to be on target. This one here, he's going to be off target as well. So we repeat the procedure. Again, colored die is going to be board 25. White die will be 18. So it's going to be on board 18 as well. Where does it go? Somewhere on row 5. And it's going to be hex V, V5. So we find V5. There it is. This is where we start. And now we do a random location die roll to see where it actually ends up. So we go 1 for 1. Ding. All right, so now we've designated our drop zones. Now we've also designated the direction of flight. And now we can start laying out our parachutes. So you grab your sticks for each wing, bring them over to your drop zone, and you start with the first one in the center, and then you put 2 on either side. It doesn't matter which ones go where, because again, they're not going to end up where they are. If you want to give them weapon canisters, by all means. This should be pre-designated before you roll. Obviously, you don't know where your flights are going to land. Let's get rid of this. Get rid of that. You should actually, I did that incorrectly. You should actually designate which wing your weapons are going to be dropped in. So let's give another LMG to the first wing. I made a mistake on that one. So make sure that you pre-designate which wing your support weapon canisters get dropped with. All right, once the plane kicks you out the doors and you're descending under canopy, we start to look at drift. Now, before we do that, we're going to lay out all the other ones as well. So let's do drop zone 2. All right, so all our chutes are now on the board. All our chutes were put down over the drop points, and now we can carry on with E9.2, which is actual drift procedure. This is where things start to get hairy. All right, every stick is subject to drift, and that includes weapon canisters as well. They will all drift their own way. Now, there's some exceptions to the drifting rules, and it's primarily nationality based. So the first things first is let's talk about support weapons. British paratroopers retain possession of their LMGs, light mortars, and radio counters. U.S. paratroopers retain their light mortars. So those support weapons are placed with the unit inside the cloaking box. So for example, looking at the British and Americans in this particular case, so here we have a 9-2 with a 648 airborne troop, and with a radio, this would all be included under one cloaking counter. Similarly, with the American 747, you have the old light mortar attached with it as well, so you land with that support weapon. All other support weapons for those nationalities must come down as their own separate shoe counter. The other thing that we have to factor in is drift. Again, there's two exceptions to the general drifting rules, and that is for the Germans and for the Russians. So the Germans, because they're not as steerable chutes, and because they drop so low, they actually have the distance that you can drift. So typically the way this works is a random location die roll, much like again with the sniper. One color is direction, the other color is the distance. You have the distance and you round up. So you're going to be anywhere from 1 to 3 hexes off of your drop point. Russians, conversely, because they jumped so high, they drifted much farther. They actually add 50% rounded down to any wind adjustment. So you can have anywhere from 1 to 9 deviation off of your drop point. And each stick has to take its own location die roll. So let's start with drop zone 1, and we'll do the first shoots. Now, all right, so for the first one, again, just a random location die roll using the sniper clock as a way of doing it. Black colored die would be direction. So we're going to go 1 for 5 for the weapon canister. Again, because we're German, playing Rachi Ridge, this number is actually halved, and then it's rounded up, so it's going to be a maximum of 3 hexes. So 1, 2, 3, all by its lonesome. Next, we'll do the main shoot, and it's going to go 4 for 2. So it went the exact opposite way. And you continue the process for all your shoots. So 2 for 2, 1 for 3. Guess he's going to go get that weapon. 3 for 5. So that'll be 3 for 3 because it's rounded up. And then the main 5/8 shoot is going to go 5 for 3 as well. Isn't that convenient? And here we have the weapon canisters going 3 for 3. And then the main shoot will be 4 for 1. So you can see how quickly you're spread out. Now, we're not done. Each shoot has to now undergo an adjustment based on the wind. So again, right now we have a mild breeze blowing from the west to the east. So every shoot is going to be drifting downwind 2 hexes. If it was a heavy breeze or gust, it would be, if it was a gust, it would be 3 hexes. And if it's heavy winds, you're going to be going down 4 hexes. So we're going to move each of these parachutes down 2 hexes downwind. So that's quite easy. All right, so what we've done is we've just started to descend all our parachutes. This all happens simultaneously, just to bear in mind while you're moving one counter at a time, and you can do defensive fire as you go. Just remember that all shoots are descending at the same time. So at this point, we're still in the movement phase. At this point, the defender, if he's on board, is allowed to do any kind of defending fire. And again, we'll get into that at the end. Next up, we do landing. Now, landing happens at the end of defense of subsequent first fire versus paratrooper. So right at the tail end of the movement phase is when you actually hit the ground, no pun intended. Now, every nationality except for Germans is allowed to move 1 hex in any direction. This represents you yanking on your risers and you're trying to avoid any obstacle that you land in. Germans, again, because of the nature of their the way they did business, are exempt from this. They land exactly where they are. So if you're on a building, that's what you're going to hit. Now, when you land at the base level of your current hex. Now, there's 2 exceptions to this. One is bridges and one is interior building hexes. So, for example, say this parachute here landed on this bridge. There's a 1 or 2 out of a d6 chance of landing on the bridge. A 1 out of 6 if it's a 1-lane bridge, so bear that in mind. And if you roll a 3+, it lands in the hex, which means you're likely going to be in the gully underneath the bridge. Um, there's a -1 die roll to this modifier if you're unbroken. So if in the process of descending and you're shot at and you become broken, you don't get this bonus. However, if you're not unshot, if you're unscathed and you hit the bridge, you get a -1 to your die roll. So it's actually going to be 1, 2, or 3, and you'll land on the bridge. A 4+ would be inside the obstacle as well. For interior buildings, hexes, cover that later on in the injuries part. So let's bring back to where he was. Now, next thing we'll talk about is off-board landing. So, for example, say the chute, for whatever reason, rolled really poorly on its random location and it lands off-board here somewhere. The way off-board landings work, similar to gliders, it's reverse terrain order. So you butt up an empty board along the side and then you just reverse the terrain. All right, so we have our nice handy dandy terrain extra map board butted up against the live board. All right, so for landing off board, the process is similar to Chapter E 8.221 regarding gliders and landing off board. It's again basically the reverse order of the terrain in the direction of travel. So in this particular case, this is the direction of travel. So we look at the terrain and we match it accordingly. So open, 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 and open. So now we know that we're going to be landing in open. So once the parachute lands off board, you're not eliminated, you're still in play. And the way you get back into the playing area is as follows. Each movement phase, you can move 1 hex per friendly movement phase, regardless of terrain. So again, in this particular case, it's open, so it's not an issue. However, if you look at the terrain, it could be difficult, it could be not, it doesn't matter. All you can move is 1 hex. So on the first turn, you're helpless. You would drop your cloak, you put down your unit here. That's in box E. So that would be this unit here. All right, and now in turn 2, movement phase, he can move 1 hex. So we start moving him this way. All you're allowed to do is per movement phase. In turn 3, he can move 1 more. Now he's adjacent to the board edge. So on turn 4, he'll be able to enter in normally. And this works as well for support weapon canisters. Say support weapon lands off board. Only unit that is able to get an off-board support weapon canister is an off-board unit. So again, this unit here, they both come down where they are. The 548 is moves 1 hex. 548 moves 1 hex, and then on turn 3 he can move 1 more. At this point he can spend a point to try and pick up the canister. All right, he's identified it. We find out what it is. In this case, it's P, which should be an LMG. No, it's a medium. So he manages to pick up a medium. He's now armed, and he can continue going back on to the map board 1 hex at a time. So his turn 4, he'll move over here. Now he's adjacent. So come turn 5, he'll be able to actually enter the board and move normally, just as if he's entering from on board. And he would be entering on board concealed with his, in this case, medium. So again, turn 5, he's going to be able to enter the board and contribute to the fight. And remember, if there's no unit off board, your support weapon canister is effectively lost and it's eliminated. And the only time you count for casualty victory points if you land off board as a unit is if you're eliminated in the process. So again, we take our terrain and we replicate it backwards, and say you land in a blaze, in a pond, or in a flooded stream, then you'll be eliminated. And that's the only time that you count for loss. All right, so let's look at injuries. Again, this is going to be Chapter E, Section 942, injuries. And every 5/8 parachute landing in this list of features that you're going to see here is must take an immediate normal morale check using the 7 morale of the chute. So again, leadership modifiers do not apply, nor does your inherent morale of your troops, in this case 5/8. You use a 7 morale of the troop to take a normal morale check. if you land in any one of those features that are on the screen right now. If it's a half-inch support weapon canister, you must take a normal morale check using the morale of 7 if you land in dense jungle or swamp and or pansies. Obviously, failing that means your weapon is gone. It's buried in the jungle or the swamp, and you're never going to see it again. Similarly, if you land in an interior building hex, you take an NMC. You then move 1 hex downwind to another building hex, or you take another NMC if it's an interior one, and so on until you reach the edge of the building and a non-interior building hex. You then land at the base level. But again, you're still going to have to take a normal morale check because you're in a building hex location. So what does that look like? All right, so this is the chute here. You land down in the building. Again, you're a German, so you're unable to adjust your final hex location by 1. So you're going to land exactly on top of this interior building hex. So what happens here is you take a normal morale check using that morale of 7. In this case, I failed it, so you become broken. So whatever in box L would become broken. And that is you guys here. Now this stays inside the cloaking box. You become broken. All right, at this point, your chute then travels downwind. Again, our wind is traveling from the top to the bottom of the screen. So you're going to come into this building. You're now no longer in an interior building hex, you're on a building hex. So you're going to land at the base level. However, because it's still a building hex, you still have to take another morale check. So you can do that. And you fail again, and you're broken. So this time you're going to be actually reduced to a half squad. If you land in any one, and this procedure applies for whether you land in a building or, again, one of those features. I'm going to repost a list right here. So again, if you land any one of these features, you have to take a normal morale check. Now, this morale check is actually impacted by the strength of the breeze. So if there's no breeze, there's no modifier. If it's a mild breeze, it's a 1 check. And if it is a heavy wind or gust, then it is a 2 check. So that's if you land in any one of those features I've just shown you. Like, for example, this building here, you'd have to take one. If you land in this olive grove symbol here, you'd have to take one. If you land in a Craig location, you'd have to take one, etc. You take a normal morale check. If you land in a normal open ground hex like these ones here, all you do is you take a normal task check. Again, modified by the strength of the wind. So if with a mild breeze, you're going to have a 1 check. And what happens if you fail? 1 check. So I failed my 7 morale. So this unit here would actually become deployed. So box F is a leader and a squad. So the squad becomes deployed. And what happens is you have to pre-designate this. In this case, I'm going to use the top hex will be the one closest to the top. The bottom guy will be the guy closest to the bottom, and I'm going to stack my leader with him. And then you deploy a second chute 1 hex downwind. So we clone this, we drag it down here. Now, when it comes time to actually remove the chutes in the advanced phase, 1 half squad with the leader will be here. The other half squad will be in this location with this other unit. And you do that for all of your chutes. So for each one of these chutes here, you have to do a task check or a NMC, depending if it lands in any one of those weird terrains. And luckily, in this particular case, I got lucky and most of the chutes landed in open ground. There's no real terrain affecting anything. And you landed here as well. So all my hexes are open ground. Nobody landed on top of a building, unlike the scenario that Dave and I played, at least the first couple of turns when I landed half my units on buildings, and it just was a mess. So again, when you're picking your drop zone points, you have to bear in mind things like, is my drop point going to be on target? 50-50 chance. Is there any obstacles I want to avoid? If it's really dense, like this area up here, you have a lot of crag, you've got buildings. It may not be the best idea to drop your troops up here, even though in this particular scenario, historically, that's what the Germans did. They actually landed on the mountain. It wasn't a great day. However, because of their attack and surprise, they were able to achieve victory. However, in terms of the game, you may want to avoid putting your drop zones in areas that contain lots of crag and or buildings, let alone something as massive as a city. Normally, paratroop drops like this kind of terrain here, which is probably why they included this board in this scenario for you to land your troops. You assemble, you find your weapons, and then you spend a couple turns getting onto the objective. Typically, that's the way airborne operations are done. So let's do that for each one of our shoots. We'll see what happens with them. So this guy here, open ground, so he takes a task check, and he fails. That is Echo. We'll do Alpha, open ground, so it takes a normal check, and again, you just continue through everything. You only have to do your support weapons if they land in any kind of those features like jungle, swamp, and or pansies. Aside from that, you don't have to roll for them. So this squad A made it. What about D? Made it as well with a 1 check. I need a 6 or less. C, you're good. And you just go forward. So I'm just going to do that quickly. And there we have it. All the shoots have been rolled for injuries. In this case, it was only task checks to see if they retained complete unit. If they fail that, they have to deploy. And again, support weapon canisters only have to undergo NMCs if they land in dense jungle, swamp, or pansies. And you can see the consequences of rolling crappy. So most of my squads are broken up into half squads. Luckily, all my weapons are landed on board, and none of them were lost. And that is it for the movement phase and landing. So once your injuries are done, you move on to the next section, which is 9.43 final fire. So then we're now in the defensive fire phase. So any enemy units that are still capable of fire are able to fire at this point. Then we have the advancing fire phase and rout phase. Again, you're not able to do anything as a paratrooper. So even if you're broken as you descend, you're not able to rout away. You're going to be spending that turn in that location that you landed. So you're not subject to any of the rout rules, therefore. So there's no surrender or failure to rout. Again, you're just a parachute counter until after the rout phase is over. Now we're in the advanced phase. We look at 9.6, and it's again, you don't actually advance, but you come out of your chute. So you get out of your harnesses and you take up your form. So let's quickly put all those guys down. And then the last thing we do is we flip all of our weapon canisters over. Again, you don't know what it is, and this works for both sides. So if a defender happens upon one of your shoots, he doesn't know necessarily to race for it because it's a medium, say, that he may want to employ himself. So all the shoot counters for the support weapons are flipped over. And that is essentially the paratroop rules in a nutshell. Now, again, there's some exceptions to this. All right, so let's look at one of the exceptions. This is going to be Chapter E 9.7, pre-1942 German paradrops. To represent the fact that they came down partially armed, your 548s, your 238s, your 228s are represented by lower quality troops. Basically, your 548s are equivalent to a 228, your 238s are equivalent to a 128, and your 228 crews are also equivalent to 128. And the way this is represented, typically the way the rules recommend it, if you don't have, this is for Vassal, obviously you can use the proper counters. However, if you're a standard player, you may have to use the system counter to represent the fact that you're actually not full strength. So if you have the counters, you can use those. If you don't, then you use something like a system counter just on top of your unit to represent the fact that you're partially armed. So how do we arm ourselves? You basically spend a movement phase looking for a canister. So the way it works is you need to roll a 1 or less. And the way you get a 1 or less is there's a -1 per hex entered, and you roll at the end of your movement phase. So if you want the best chances, you want to get a 4 hex, -4 to your roll, or you can choose the CX and get an extra -6 to your die roll. However, bear in mind that if you CX, there's also a penalty of a +1. So a 6 basically will always fail, and a 5 or less will get you what you want. Of course, if you're with the leader, you get the leader bonus on top of that, so you're almost guaranteed, if you CX, to find a weapon canister and arm yourself. So let's look at this guy here. He's going to move towards his weapon canister up here. So he's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and he's done his move. So now he can roll with a -4 to the die roll to see if he finds a weapon. So 5 minus 1 is 5 minus 4 is 1. So he's actually going to become a 238. So we can get rid of this. This guy here, he's represented by a 228. So we're going to move him. Let's move him. His objective is going to be to get up on the hill, so we'll just move him forward. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, he's going to get a -4 to his die roll. And he finds one. So he becomes a 5 for 8, and this gets deleted. All right, so that's how the pre-1942 German Paradrops work. You're represented by either a system counter, or if you're playing Vassal, you can use the Fallschirmjäger tab under the Axis, or to get the proper counter as well. All right, so we're looking at defensive fire options now. So again, because all your chutes are descending up to the drifting part of the rules in the movement phase, you're allowed to do defensive first fire options. Now, there's a limitation as to what can shoot, and we'll get into that as we get to it. So again, any defender can use defensive first fire or subsequent first fire versus them, even if they've drifted off board. So you're always going to have a sight to them. There's a couple of exceptions to this, but again, we'll get to that. Aerial paratroops are always subject to hazardous movement die roll and can claim neither height advantage, terrain effect, obviously concealment, and or any other kind of hindrance to protect them. Any hazardous movement die roll applied to the attack of any aerial support weapon in an attempt to destroy malfunction it. So if you want to target a canister, which is always possible, you can attack it. Typically, these will come down with the troops, and in this particular case, for example, it will be random selection which one you actually attack, but there is a chance that you actually have a chance of disabling or destroying, possibly malfunctioning, a support weapon by attacking it specifically. And remember that all these paratroops are descending at the same time, so while you're moving, you're drifting procedures one counter at a time, and in fact, the whole mass of paradrop is happening at the same time, and therefore they're considered to be moving simultaneously. Now, again, you can only attack one hex at a time, and barring a random selection die roll, you're only going to affect one target at a time. So in cases like this, again, where you have multiple targets, you could randomly end up on a support weapon canister. You could target the main unit. You could get all three if you're really lucky with your random die roll, random selection die roll. No aerial target can be attacked twice in the same hex by the same firer. Now, typically, when you're firing support weapons like a heavy in a anti-air roll, you lose your rate of fire. But if there's some weapons that potentially offer you the chance of firing multiple times, or you could choose to fire sustained fire, in which case you're not allowed to attack the same target in the same hex. Obviously, it's only spending one point of movement in that hex. You're not allowed to get the one attack at it. Obviously, you're never going to leave residual fire while you're hanging in the air, and sending paratroopers are not subject to pinning task checks or pin results and or heated battle results. So you'll never see the Berserk Fanatic units ascending and making your day worse. Again, I may have glossed over this, but in the process of defensive fire, should the unit involve, or should the shoot counter involve a leader, and the leader gets eliminated, the squad is not affected by the loss of a leader. So there's no leader loss morale checks or leader loss task checks for the loss of a leader. So just bear that in mind. Again, you're relatively unaffected by the fact that the leader is with you. You can't use a leadership modifier in any kind of way in that turn while you're under parachute, nor are you affected by him should he suffer some unfortunate result. Now, there's a couple of cases when you will not be able to see a chute. Typically, you can see them descending in the sky regardless of where you are. However, if you are in a blind hex, for example, say you're located behind this building here, you would not be able to necessarily target these hexes here. You could obviously target these guys because they're not in a blind hex, but because you're in a blind hex to this point here, you would not be able to fire on these chutes. Anything that basically runs through this building, however that works out. Yeah, so in this case, you would not be able to target this chute. You could target this chute or this chute from the sky was here. So that's the only real chance of not being in line of sight. And of course, if you're in nighttime operations and you don't have the NVR radius or outside that, obviously you'll not be able to see it. And if there's any combination of smoke, low visibility, or LOS hindrances that total 6 or more, say for example dust is in effect and there's smoke in effect, and that adds up to at least a +6 to your die roll, obviously you're not going to be able to see it. You won't have LOS. But aside from those three instances, you'll be able to see anything on the board. So who can fire? Only small arms, which basically means your inherent firepower, and any light anti-air weapons that can defense first fire or subsequent first fire versus aerial paratroops. So that means things like an anti-air machine gun that's crew exposed and manned. It's anti-air weapon that has an IFE equivalent, and or a heavy machine gun in an anti-aircraft role, which again basically means you're losing your rate of fire. If those parameters are met, those units can fire. You cannot fire ordnance. Anything that requires it to hit die roll, you cannot use. Sniper attacks are not effective against parachutes and or fire lanes as well. Similar to injuries section, if a result gets an effect on a unit, let's fire this anti-air. So it's a 4 firepower. He pays a -2 for hazardous movement. On the IFT is going to be a 4 on the 4 table, which should be a 1 check. Right, so it takes a 1 morale check. So it needs a 6 or less to pass. I failed. I rolled boxcars. Can anything get any worse? So I suffer casualty reduction and I am broken. So as well as ELR replacement. So that is unit E. And we look at E and we have our fellow here. So, oh yeah, that's right. I've been using the wrong counters. Sometimes it's good to use the Vassal tool. Sometimes in this case it's not. The Fallschirmjäger 548 does not ELR, so you have to use a normal Wehrmacht 548. Alright, so he gets ELR'd. He gets casualty reduced to half squad. And he becomes broken. So he had a really bad day. Now we'll fire this guy here. So that all happens here again. He doesn't know what's in that parachute. He just knows that he fired at it. He got a good result and whatever happened there. Now, if you have an attack on, let's fire the anti-air on chute A. And again, this is going to be on the 8's table with a -2. So it's going to be a 4 on the 8, which is really going to hurt. That's got to be probably a K4. Oh, 2 check. So 2 morale check, a 5 or less. Again, this is a squad with a 9-2, so you don't use the leadership modifier. You don't use the inherent morale of the unit. You just use the base of the parachute, which is a 7. So a 2 check is going to be a 5 or less, which he failed by 3, so that's under his ELR, so he does not ELR replace, but he is broken. Now, because it's 2 different units inside that chute, you randomly select who actually is broken. So the color die will be the leader, and the leader is in fact broken. This unit is not affected by the fact that this leader broke, so no leader loss task check is required because that 9-2 broke. When they land and the parachutes come off, you'll have a broken 9-2 and you'll have a 5-4-8 unscathed. All right, and that's basically the way resolution works for an attack. If you're attacking a chute as a defender, and if all the contents of that chute suffer 1 check, whether it's a K result or a morale check or what have you, and all the contents are randomly determined who actually suffers that result. So if it's a K4, again, you randomize who gets the K and who gets the 4 morale check. Again, we'll do the colored die will be the leader. So again, he's having a really bad day. You do your wound die roll, and he's only wounded. And now we do the 1-4 morale check, so we need to be a 3 or less. And surprisingly, they fail that egregiously. They're still under the ELR in this scenario. They have an ELR of 4, so they're still fine. They're not ELR'd, they're just broken. All right, and that is the resolution of a defensive fire attack. So to sum up defensive fire, again, you have to use inherent firepower. You can use an HMG in an anti-air role. You can use a gun that has an IFV equivalent and or crew exposed AFV which has an AMG machine gun. If you have one of those, then you can choose to defensive first fire or subsequent first fire against a descending parachute. And there we have it. So that's the Chapter E, Section 9 rules on paradrops. Fairly exhaustive, I hope. I've covered everything. If I've missed anything, by all means, let me know. If I got anything wrong, again, please let me know so that I can correct the video and produce a proper one. But I think I've covered everything. Yeah, don't be intimidated by the paradrop. It's quite easy. Things to bear in mind, obviously, again, your drop zone selection is key. Trying to pick areas where you just mitigate the odds against you landing in shitty terrain. When we played this scenario, Rachi Ridge, I'm playing the Germans, and I probably naively, because I've never done paradrop myself, I ended up picking a drop zone in X3, another one here, and another one over here. And most of my rolls were successful. However, this chalk, because it landed on target and the deviation was horrible, and because I'm German, I cannot move that 1 hex available under the landing rules 9.4. I landed on the buildings and most of my units broke. So it was just wasn't really great. You will get a lot of dispersion in terms of half squad deployments because again, you only have a 7 morale and you start throwing on a 1 check and or a 2 check for open ground, you're probably going to be deploying into your half squad components. And so that's one reason why we like this scenario, Rachi Ridge, because it's unopposed landing for the first 3 turns. So it's a chance for the Germans to get some semblance of order. If you're actually have defenders on board, your job is going to be that much more difficult. Rarely do the airborne troops land where they're supposed to. There's so many variables between the terrain, the winds, the pilot's familiarity with the terrain, being on target or usually off target, as was the case historically for most airborne missions. And this works for gliders as well, so I think I'll do a glider video coming up as another tutorial. But yeah, paratroops, use them. I don't know how many scenarios there are in ASL that have them. I know there's a Japanese one. Ritter Krieg, yes, he did one a few years ago. There's the Sriracha Ridge one. But get into the Paradrops if you can, and it's a really interesting aspect to play into. Again, it's strictly RNG. This is actually a fairly good. I wish I had this kind of deployment in an actual face-to-face game. It would have made my life a lot easier. As it was, I was all dispersed. I actually had a canister land just over here, one of my mediums, and all I have is a half squad in the vicinity to be able to get it. And of course, the Brits come on from that edge, and he's quickly going to be overwhelmed. So if I would have had this kind of dispersion of my forces, which again is not that bad, my day might have been a lot better than it was. But let me know what you guys think, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.